Welcome to Real Talk with Life After Grief, Chris, where we talk about relevant issues as it relates to individuals in grief as they navigate finances and the advisors who help them. We help clients in grief navigate financial matters. We also teach advisors how to emotionally and financially work with clients in grief through an unparalleled process. This week's podcast is sponsored by Life After Grief Financial Planning and Life After Grief Consulting.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Real Talk with Life After Grief, Chris. Today I have the pleasure of introducing a dynamic lady who has done a tremendous amount of good with a tremendous amount of grief. Please meet Carolyn Moore. She is the president and the founder of the Modern Widows Club, I'm sure, and I promise that we will get into the dynamics of that if you've not heard about it before. Carolyn was widowed on Valentine's Day in 2000 and was left to raise $2 by herself. I can't even imagine, and it just scares me to even think about, that thought and everything that goes along with it. Through Carolyn's tragedy, she started a well-known nonprofit called the Modern Widows Club. And in her journey, she struggled to find mentors to model healing and growth that she desperately needed. And there's an old saying, and I'm going to try to replicate it or duplicate it. If you can't find it built already, you build it yourself. And so Carolyn has certainly built this machine that does so much good for other people. Carolyn, welcome to the show and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks a lot, Chris. A little bit about myself. My gosh. Well, I would say most people know me as probably America's biggest widow advocate.
I would agree with that.
and internationally representing the United States on all topics that focus on widow support solutions, research and advocacy, right? But it didn't start out that way. Honestly, it started becoming widowed and having a personal experience. And then that grew into meeting hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of widows and starting to see a lot of similarities and commonalities in their stories, and most specifically, where they're getting stuck and where the systems that overlap with them are either broken or completely non-existent. So that kind of, I'm a very curious person. And so that what really fascinated me, that I had a personal experience and struggled with many of these areas, but I didn't realize millions of other widows were. So I became fascinated with understanding, sort of as a sociology kind of way, just, well, who is serving widows and what is being offered to widows? And even furthermore, what could a future look like if we resolved some of these issues? What would the experience be for a widow in 20 years, in 40 years, in 60 years? What do we do today to improve on the experience that they have? And there's a lot of areas to improve. And so that's sort of how it grew. But it really came from just listening to so many widows' voices and realizing it's uncommon knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You shared an experience with me that I think a lot of folks, obviously I'm not a widow or a widower, and this experience that you shared with me when we first spoke really kind of hit home about the financial impact. And, when you were trying to figure stuff out and having to, source money from a different area. And do you mind going into kind of some more detail about that, if you will?
Sure. Well, first of all, what listeners really need to understand is there's four main reasons why widows struggle worldwide. So this sets up the framework, right? Financial insecurity is number one. We have over 800,000 widows in the United States that are living in severe poverty, meaning they cannot provide a home or food or security for themselves. It's unbelievable. Financial insecurity is the first one. Disinheritance is the second. The third is government neglect. And the fourth is social exclusion. which I've had to really study all of these different areas.
Right.
Financial insecurity it means income ends from
Right.
the breadwinner in your family. It means if I lose my rental agreement and go to find a new rental, I'm going to have to prove that I have 3 times the monthly payment of income.
Right.
So many women can't. They get completely taken out of the choices. Banks won't give them credit. This is a problem worldwide where widows don't even have access to banking, and so credit gets taken away that you've developed together.
Sure.
Now you're being basically judged on your own credit and ability to make income. And when women make less income than men, even in the same career position, we know this,
Right.
then it puts her at a huge disadvantage. Huge. That is extremely hard for her to overcome when she gets dropped into that. And then there's tax implications, right? There's, for 2 years you get to qualify for widow, which is basically the same as filing married.
Right.
With married, you have 2 people under one household with double deductions.
Right.
Now you're suddenly I had a household or a single taxed higher with less deductions.
It's
So
not fair.
I always say I dare anyone to get dropped into this situation and come out the other side, whistling Dixie.
Right.
Because it's not going to happen. It's I often use my example. I was a stay-at-home mom for 1 month. I had worked and built a company for 3 years with 50 people that we employed for an interior design firm. And I had worked to the point where I got to step away to be with my daughters 2 and 4. And my husband died a month later. We had zero income when he died.
Wow.
So, and I got pushed out of our company by the 2 other owners because they needed to keep the business going, and I didn't provide anything anymore for that situation. So I lost my husband, I lost my income, I lost my business, and my insurance went up.
Yeah.
So I don't get joint discounts now in the insurance realm. It's every area that a widow touches, it just feels like she's getting knocked down again. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not only in what, I'm thinking about, and it didn't even really occur to me until, we were talking now, is that the aspect of your significant other passing away, that is daunting. And you have to deal with that aspect. But then you have these other scenarios as the person who is continuing to live on that you may never have seen or encountered this, and other people that aren't in your situation can't relate and can't even have the foresight to think about what you're going to go through. And just, speaking to you and listening to you, that's one of the things that makes your organization so great. I'm always an advocate for mentors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always said, I cannot duplicate the wisdom of others. I can only learn from them, but I'm sure going to, utilize their wisdom so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And essentially that's what you're providing for, hundreds, thousands, millions of people that you've touched over, the last decade plus, since you've created your organization. And, that's remarkable because I'm just thinking of some of the ladies that I've worked with in the past that, were reaching for straws and had nowhere to go. And then just the little bit of information that I had and some of the exposure, I was able to connect them with some of the right resources. And then when you and I met, there's a widow that is very gracious. And she's like, Chris, push me all the information you got. I'll evaluate it and I'll tell you what I really think about it. And the thing that she had said to me was, man, I wish I had this information earlier. And I said, well, I'm giving it to you now and everything that I, get exposure to. And she's like, thanks. It really helps tremendously. Yeah, I'm appreciative, of what you do, for folks.
Well, the speed in which someone finds a mentor and resources is directly related to the outcome of reducing depression, despair, struggle, what we call the secondary losses.
Right.
Because if you can't financially figure out what your livelihood is going to be, you're more than likely it's going to be a cascading impact of no health insurance, no home to live in, no food. I mean, it just completely trickles down. And so the speed, it's really what we do at Modern Widows Club is we are available to reduce that distance of suffering for widows. We can't reduce their grief because grief is the response to
Right.
loving. It's actually still part of the actual relationship. And
Sure.
that's part of the difficulty because people think the death of a body is the end of the relationship. And that's not actually true. It's actually the end of the relationship is the grieving phase. And
Right.
when she's coming out of the grieving, in the grieving phase, she needs certain resources. Some of those are emotionally, mentally, but financial is always, that, I mean, 3 days later after my husband died, I was in the state attorney's office. I was talking to the accountant. I was talking to tax advisors. I was life insurance. You're thrust into these worlds, the underworld
Right.
of death, and you've never been there before. So it's like sticking someone in a dark room and saying, and figure out which door to go through.
Sure.
Having gone through this experience myself, I just went, whoa, there's got to be a better way. Yeah. And so now we've become the only widow mentoring and leadership program in the world. And we have created 150 widow leaders who are now advocating, finding resources, and that will be forever, talking about what's the reality versus the myths. And that
Correct.
is the real problem, because as someone who doesn't know the experience, I'm grateful you don't know the experience, but there's a level of respect we have to have for the wisdom of the people who do have the experience. And that's what I have found is the biggest difficulty is we're not really listening to these widows, these widowers who are the subject matter experts, right? And
Right.
they're the ones that inform what is needed, not someone who doesn't have the experience informing them what they need.
Sure.
And that's why it's so important what we do, because we're widow funded, we're widow founded, we're widow ran. We have 4 widows on staff now. It is across the board. We have a very big plan for 2023 and the next 4 years. And we want a complete movement and enterprise in really raising women's empowerment and economic empowerment. We want to work with law firms because there are so many women, the whole disinheritance part.
Right.
So there's many areas that we have to work in. Recently, I just found out that we live in Florida, right?
Right.
Listeners live in a lot of different places, but I just recently found out that Modern Widows Club was the only widow grieving support resource in the My Florida, My Family Gov system.
Right. I know exactly what you're speaking about. Yeah.
Well, the problem with that is there's 914,000 widows, and there's 1.14 million widow and widowers as a widowed community
Right.
in the state. We need more support.
Yeah. A lot more support.
One organization can't handle that kind of reach. So now I've identified that widows and widowers, specifically widows, women, they are not considered a vulnerable category, and they're not considered survivors.
Right.
And so when you're not considered either of those things, you aren't even seen by the system that is there set up and funded for you to get resources.
And that's very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to you talk too, and then my experience specifically with, some widows, the mentorship aspect is huge and it's great. And what I have found with the widows in particular that I work with is that I obviously I'm not a mentor, but I serve as kind of their protector,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so to
Yeah.
speak. If you're talking about financially related and other matters too, and I understand the dynamic, and my wife and I have talked about this. When I encounter a widow and I engage and I formally work with a widow,
Mm-hmm.
I am not engaging with them only for finances.
No.
I know that I engage with them because, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to go back and, kind of correct it, but I serve in a capacity that their husband did in regards to some of the things that the husband took care of.
Right.
And that could mean finances. That could mean create a buffer for some other family members. One of the things that I've, had to create a buffer for is folks trying to take advantage of my clients that are widows that may come into a pool of money.
That's right.
And so then family members say, well, you have this money. I'm going to guilt you into giving me this. And then I step in and I say, well, hey, I see this. I know this. I'm going to step out on a limb. And if it's children in particular, or if it's other family members, I come in and say, hey, your mother has, or your sister has employed me to be their financial guardian, so to speak, financial planner, whatever word you want to put there. And I am advising my client not to hand out any money at all. And that's a very, very difficult task. Or we massage it in a different way and say, hey, okay, we're going to give out some money and that's going to be it. You're going to get your gift of inheritance on January 5th, 2023, and don't expect anything else at all, because that's kind of where it stops.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different when it comes from me than it does, because there's not a confrontation. And I play the bad guy all the time, and I'm fine with that. And that's just kind of the nature of what I do. But, when I come in and I say that, I am, coming from the heart, and I really want to protect my client, and I want to make sure what has been set up or what not has not been set up is in their best interest. And ultimately, I want my client to only have to worry about grieving. As novice as that sounds, that's really what my ultimate goal is.
Yeah.
And I heard another expression, grieving is a journey that you go through alone. However, the support and the healing is a format where you go with other people who support you. And I really thought about that, and I was like, yeah, your feelings are your own when you're
Yeah.
going through that process, and other people can compound those or make them worse, but they're your own feelings. You don't share those. It's not like I share my feelings with my my kids or my wife or anything like that. They're my own. So, and I really thought about that. Some of my favorite clients are widows. And I think about my mother. My mother was not a widow, but my mother had a very, very strong personality, and a very dominant personality. And I think about that in terms of not having my father there and how dramatically that would have changed. I take that to heart and, try to empathize as much as possible, not necessarily being in the situation. I can not say I know how anyone feels that's a widow. I would not, even venture to step on that. But I can empathize, with folks and the journey that I've gone through, with some other widows on the
Mm-hmm.
financial and the personal end, because some of my widows call me and say, hey, Chris, I had this situation, or I had that situation, and it has nothing to do with money, nothing to do with money. And then we work through that.
Yeah, many times it has to do with
Yes.
morals and ethics and values, right? Because they've lost that person that they would typically go to. And now their world is talking to individuals like you. And there is no way for most widows to separate the emotional from the practical of the occupation or
Sure.
purpose of who you're speaking to. It comes with them wherever they are. And so what you're doing is championing them. And I always tell financial advisors, don't even expect to talk about money. the first or second time you meet with them, because you're going to get disappointed real fast.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. So when I am in my capacity of training other advisors, what I typically say to them is don't expect to have any significant money movement or conversations for 6 months.
Here's the main two questions: can I survive?
Yes.
And are you in my corner?
Right.
Right? If either of those things is uncertain, which, for many people, the question of whether you're on my side is, you might be an advisor who was chosen by my husband, and I don't particularly even know you, right? Like me, I didn't have a financial advisor. I did get a windfall life insurance check. I didn't know my advisor. My advisor didn't even know me. It didn't go well. After a year, I released their employment, and I went and found someone who was an educator for me, because I recognized that I'm in a wilderness without any tools here.
Right.
And as a very confident, independent woman before, my husband and I, we talked about our finances, but we each had our own role. And now I am 100%
Right.
responsible as the steward of this gift, right? And there's a lot of honor in that for widows. They want to do well by what was given to them. It's a legacy moment for them. How do I
Sure.
continue this on with the generosity that has been given to me? It's seen as a token of love for the ladies. So, and let me just tell you, the predation that occurs in widowhood. Yeah, what you were saying, how you have to be the protector. Because I often say, when I talk to men, many times I'm like, you think that just having life insurance is going to make it all get resolved. But what I need to tell you is that ups your level of predation that she isn't going to see coming. And we see it on our social sites by blocking at least 5,000 predators a year off of all.
Right.
We have 4 volunteers that 24/7, 365 days have to watch our sites, because if you're looking for vulnerable women to prey on, Modern Widows Club is the perfect place to come. So we have to confront that with educational webinars,
Right.
in what we teach at all of our communities. So finding someone who, and it's biblical, to Isaiah 117, to be the protector for widows. If we had more people in the world that were like that and really stood up to the predation, because predation comes from the outside, but it also comes from the inside, like you just said, when the family members start coming and saying, hey, by the way. And I had, I helped fund my sister's college education, and, had to write out a contract and a repayment process. I didn't
Sure.
have anyone like you to kind of stand as a in between. And that is what grief upon this protecting yourself is exhausting, because that's not what your
Right.
world was before. You didn't even think about these things before, and everything is new all at once. So I really appreciate what you had to say there about the predation and being a protector, because if we had more people that really thought like that, and were aware that predation, even internally in families, happens, it's very common. And that's what we really need to understand. It's very, very common that it happens. So you're mentoring, you're being a mentor, a champion, a supporter, really the conduit for her at that time.
Well, thank you. And even in a normal family where a family member, passes away, they're still using your words, predation. Anytime there's money that changes hands, someone is always going to come and, either try to take advantage or have their hand out. And I've seen it, so many times. And the other thing too, that I think about, when I'm working with widows, if I can have just 1% of helping that widow create a new identity and making it that much more positive, I'm all about it. And I feel like I'm, obligated to pay it forward, because I had so many good people in my life during my grief journey. And, I don't look at this, now as, I'm 15 years, beyond the death of my parents, about 10 years beyond the death of my son. I look at things that were placed in my life kind of on purpose. I'm a spiritual person, and I had to go through a lot of tragedy, just like you did, to create a lot of good for other people. And so, people say that, to me. My life is great now. I spend time with my sons, as much as I want, and my wife, and it's really honed, my sense of family. And that's all that I want to be around, is my boys. And they are going to be a reflection of me. And I know that, and I understand that. And I don't lose sight of that because I have lost so much.
Yeah. You're considered what Dr. Stephen Southwick, from the late Dr. Southwick, who wrote the book Resilience, the Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges. In that book, he talks about, all the ways different people have been impacted by loss and trauma, and he said that what we are is super survivors. And what super
Right.
survivors do is they realize that they've had a trauma. They do the work of working through the trauma, and then they go one step further, and that is that they give back. And that's what mentoring is. And because our
Sure.
unique mentoring, super survivor mentoring style
Right.
is what's needed in the world, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
100%. Yeah, I agree. I'm just in awe, um, for you to join my podcast, little old me, um, be introduced, and the great work that that you're doing. And I'm going to say this: I look at you and I listen to you, and I think of my mother,
Okay.
because my mother was such a well educated and self educated woman. And when I speak to you, that brings back very distinct memories. And it's almost like I'm talking to somebody that is just they're kind of on a pedestal. And that's kind of how I vision you in regards to my mother and all the great work that you're doing, and you know how driven you are. And I don't know if you had caught this. So before we got on the podcast, and this is kind of a something that I do psychologically, when I know that there is a lady that has a type personality, just like Carolyn does, very driven, I just take a back seat. She was telling me something about like the technical aspect of the glitches that we went into, and there was something that I needed to do. And so I get into the mindset and just say, yep, you are absolutely right. Yes, ma'am. And that's a trick that I learned from my mother, from my father. And you're right in this case. Whether my mother was right or wrong, it didn't really make a difference. What did make a difference was she was superior to me. So, and I just had to say yes.
Yeah, I think women, they have this divine feminine wisdom that I think they're born with. They're just extremely intuitive and nurturing at the core. And when I see these women come into Modern Widows Club, they're extremely broken. They're extremely in despair. They struggle with overwhelm and hopelessness. And I see the real person, the person
Sure.
they were born, the reason why they were loved in the first place by their spouses. And then my role as a mentor really is to bring them back to that place of light,
Right.
because that light is what's going to do what just happened with that thought you just had about your mother. It's the
Right.
light that you remember about your mother. It's not the dark that she all went through to become that light over and over and over again. And so I love that you recognize that. And men and women have this great duality role, right? To how can I bring the light out in him? How can, the back and forth, the reciprocal nature of that. That's when you create peace in the world. That's when you create harmony. That's when you create better relationships, partnerships, stronger individuals, families, communities. It's all related, right? So I think that's what, when we met this, and we found out we lived in the both in the same town.
Same city. Yeah, that's
We're like,
funny.
what? We found each other on LinkedIn. But there's the beautiful synchronicity of all of that, right? The alignment and the grounding and the connection that we all have. I think we
Right.
can all we are all natural mentors in something, but some people are not given the permission to go forth with it. And that's
Right.
what we need more of. And that's really what you do with your podcast, is you encourage people to go forth with it.
And it's fun. I get to have great conversations. I could listen to you talk all day because I'm learning so much that I'm going to carry, forward. And I'm in awe and I'm humbled. So
Thanks.
I appreciate
Thanks.
it. And I've been gracious. Carolyn's invited me to an event later this month that I'm happy to go to, and some other synergies that we'll, ultimately have. I want to brag on you. I want to make sure that I put some of these things in layman's terms that you have described. And I want to brag on the Modern Widows Club. And so you have, kind of as you described, things and mentorship to really help widows. I think that's really kind of at the core and of things that you do. But kind of breaking that down, you have empowerment events, whether they're here in Orlando, with the one that I'm going to be going to, and I'm assuming that they're all around the country and or all around the world.
Yeah, we have a virtual coming in April 29th, the Widow Empowerment event all over the world. Ladies, sign up for that. And then September 22nd through the 24th, we have live, where we have stage speakers for a whole Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And that's going to be in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Just as I kind of described. And then you have a tremendous, and I think tremendous is an understatement, but that's the word that I'm going to use, resources in helping widows creating a positive future. And whether it's courses, videos, blogs, newsletters, clubs, mentors, all of this great information to help, one widow help another. And then that replicates. I'm a math guy. So 1 times 2, 2 times 4, and it just exponentially replicates. And that's really what you're doing and you've continued to do for, a long time.
Widows have given me the gift of a PhD in uncommon knowledge. And Modern Widows Club is the platform where that voice gets to be heard.
And that's awesome. What else didn't we cover?
What else didn't we cover? Well, I guess, this next year we're actually going to be doing a capital campaign, and we're going to be talking about what our big plans are for the next 4 years. I would just say, one of the things as an executive director and the founder, my role is really to find people who care about widows, care enough to really invest in their futures, because what we do is so unique, and we are the leaders of pioneering widow support solutions and research. So investing in us, whether that's a corporation or wanting to sponsor a widow at an event, becoming a recurring donor, maybe a matching program with your corporation, letting all your employees know. There's many volunteer teams, that can come and assist us in any various ways. There's just a lot of ways to plug into us. And that's what I really want a lot of listeners to understand, is there is no possible way that we could have become where we are today in our 12th year without the amount of support. And right now, about 80% of our support actually comes from the widows that we serve.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so we're attempting, and not all widows can attend our empowerment events or webinars, because some of that is fee for service, right?
Right.
And so when we really love it, because the widows who are in that financially insecure state truly a gift to them, coming to an event or a webinar or anything, exponentially has a very high return on investment. And we have those outcomes now. We know that 91% of our ladies are struggling with brain fog. Well, if they don't even know what that is, they don't understand that they're normal,
Right.
right? They're having a normal experience. And so right now I'm mentoring 19 widows in my pivot, which is a 6-month mentoring
Wow. Okay.
program. That's a $3,000 investment,
Right.
$500 a month. And yet that those 19 women in 6 months will not, they'll become our greatest leaders, mentors, and advocates.
Sure.
But more importantly, they will have found the future that they didn't know 6 months
Right.
previous. And that's really what we want to do is we want to not only transform widows' lives, but we want to transfigure their life, which is when you become transformed. When transformation happens, you become more beautiful than before.
Right.
I like to say it. We need investors to help us bring more light into widows' eyes, and I don't know what that equates to monetarily.
Perfect. So how can folks get a hold of you? Meaning, what I will do is I'm going to put your contact information per your website on the link for this podcast. But what is the most effective, if someone is hearing this, what is the most effective thing that they can do in regards to getting to your website? If they want to make a donation or they want to just check out any information, how can they find you?
You can find us a lot on modernwidowsclub.org. If you want to email us directly, just go to support@modernwidowsclub.org. And we also have an 800 number, an 844-4-A-WIDOW.
Perfect. So I'll put that information on the description for the podcast as well. So, wow. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that you can think about that you haven't said? You kind of beat me to the punch. I'm thinking about some things and then you just kind of already say it, but I kind of expected that.
No, I just think that the more ways and partnerships that widows organizations can make and really just listen to their perspective and research and what the widows are telling them, I think it's extremely intriguing. I would challenge everyone to ask, who are the widows in your life? Where are they? Are they the women that you never thought of as a widow? Right? Because it might be that coworker next to you, it might be someone in your neighborhood, it might in your own family. Just recognize who they are. And everyone can do one kind thing for a widow. And the kindest thing you can do is have a coffee or a lunch or dinner and use these 3 magical words. Tell me more. People don't ask widows to tell them more enough. And they will tell you if you
Yeah,
ask them.
there's a lot going on. There's a lot
Yeah.
going on. And just one thing that is sticking out to me that you had said in your own experience is that, again, this is a financial podcast, is that when widows are faced with the decisions of all things financial, and there is an advisor that is already in their life, and if that advisor happens to be only working with the husband and not reaching out to the widow before the death occurs, almost 100% of the time, as Carolyn described, that widow is going to leave. I've experienced that in regards to picking up widows. I know that. And it's early in my career, I figured that out. And there are most times that I slight the husband in favor of the wife. And I do that, it's on purpose because I know chances are the wife is going to live longer than the husband. The wife is going to be the major decision maker behind the scenes. And if the wife does not like me, then all bets are off. I can slight the husband and I can, do things to the husband. If the wife likes me, the husband is going to say, okay, that's okay. And I understand that. And a lot of other advisors, specifically men, don't necessarily understand that you, regardless of your level of engagement with the wife, it has to be there. I often have conversations off task with the wife that may not have anything to do. And this is when I have a husband and wife couple that have nothing to do with finances. Hey, I'm just checking in. Hey, what did you think about this? Hey, what did you think about that? I want to make sure that they're engaged. And I generally like the people that I work with, so it kind of helps. And I know they're engaged when the wife calls me and has a question about what the husband is doing financially. And that lets me know that she is in tune and she has confidence in me to protect her in the event something happens to him. But that comes with experience, and it comes from really wanting to do the right thing for folks, and really being neutral and impartial. And, Carolyn, using your words, being an advocate.
That's right. It's extremely important because for the first time in history, honestly, we are seeing women inherit both from husbands and parents
Yes.
because of female longevity.
Right.
So maintaining the retention of your widowed clients is worth spending some time on really grasping the importance of these women, because it's happening more and more that we see. And we know that those women also are the women who would want to invest in our organization. We're now starting to see more, what is it called? The IRS, after 70 and a half, the IRS.
The required minimum distribution.
Thank you.
Yes.
So we're starting to get those donations now. We're starting to get added to people's um, estate
Right.
planning. We're starting to get, of course, stock and other type of donations. We set up a donor advised fund here at Modern Widows Club. So we're starting to see it. And it's because here at Modern Widows Club, we know the demographic is our biggest demographic is 40 to 70.
Right.
So we don't know what's going to happen in 20, 30 years when those 40-year-olds become 70-year-olds, right?
Right.
But we know that they're more than likely going to be the last women standing.
And I can tell you something too in regards to the required minimum distribution. So the clients that I work with, and this is only specific to kind of my practice, I have clients that gravitate to me that are already good with money. And that sounds weird, talking about a financial advisor and a financial planner, but they're good with money because they've had life circumstances that have forced them to be good with money. Whether it was a divorce or whether it was a death, they're good with money before they come to me. Very specifically to your point about an RMD, what I have found when I have gotten clients to the point where they have to take required minimum distributions out, that is in excess of really anything else that they need. So they're really just trying to find avenues of what they can do with that money. And sometimes they just end up saving it and not spending it because they are so accustomed to living below their means. And so when they get to 70, they're like, well, I'm not going to go out and just blow all my money now. And so your organization would be something awesome and great to reinvest in monetarily if they have the means to be able to do that in the form of a gift or however that comes, because it's such a great organization that just continues to keep giving.
Well, in 2000, we set a record in 2022. We actually provided 175,000 direct services.
Wow.
To widows, and it equates to about $1 a widow. So
Wow.
we actually received about $5,000 from the distributions from the IRAs, and so there's 5,000 widows. I mean, that's exactly what it's going to end up equating to. So to me, it's a really great investment. The other thing I forgot to mention, Chris, was we created this hope box that now any advisors, or really anyone, widows can buy it for themselves, but it's extremely awesome gift over at modernwidowsclub.org shop. And it's this beautiful hope box, and it says you are loved on the outside, and it says hope, heal, grow. And this hope box is meant to be a gift to a widow. You can include some things of your own, but it's also that getting them introduced to Modern Widows Club as a resource.
Awesome. I have that in my toolbox. I'm sitting here as we're doing the podcast. I'm taking notes.
And it's a tax deductible donation for $75.
Awesome. Even better.
Yeah.
Businesswoman at heart. I love it.
Yes.
Carolyn, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And thanks for the invitation later this month to the networking event that you've invited me to.
Yep. We'll see you there.
With that being said, I'm going to sign off on this podcast. And if you've liked, as a listener, this podcast or any other, please feel free to pass this on to any friends, family members, or colleagues. And also, please feel free to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you are a client and are looking to work directly with Chris and or our firm, head on over to Life After Grief FP. That is Life After Grief FP. The FP is for financial planning. If you are an advisor looking to emotionally and financially work with your client in grief, or if you are a client looking to get your advisor's head in the game, head on over to lifeaftergriefconsulting.com. That is lifeaftergriefconsulting.com. Any related information referenced in this week's podcast will be located here in the podcast section.